Executive Order 9066 was signed by President Roosevelt on February 19, 1942. The order sent 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry to concentration camps. Every year, on or about February 19, we observe a day of remembrance. Let us start from December 7, 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Enemy aliens were arrested throughout the country. By December 10, the FBI had arrested more than 1,000 Japanese. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover said the FBI had arrested all they had planned. In December of 1941, the public was uncertain on what to do about the Japanese people living in the West Coast states. Some newspapers were saying that the Japanese American in the U.S. had nothing to do with Pearl Harbor and should be treated as loyal Americans. By January of 1942, the tide was changing. California politicians were saying that Japanese people should be expelled from the state. Attorney General Earl Warren talked about a Japanese fifth column. At that time, no person of Japanese ancestry was accused of spying or sabotaging for Japan. General John DeWitt, head of the Western Defense Command, turned that fact upside down and said that was a, quote, disturbing and confirming indication that such action will be taken. By February 16, 1942, the FBI had arrested more than 2,000 Japanese. These were the so-called dangerous people that the FBI had under surveillance before the war started. On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. President Roosevelt cited military necessity was the reason for EO 9066. The three main provisions of EO 9066 were curfew, expulsion, and incarceration. The curfew provision of EO 9066 required the Japanese to stay within 5 miles of your house and be inside your house between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. The expulsion provision forced the Japanese people from the West Coast states. Japanese were expelled from the western half of the states of Washington and Oregon, all of California, and the southern third of Arizona. The incarceration provision occurred in 2 stages. First, the Japanese were rounded up and put in temporary assembly centers. The Army put up posters on telephone posts announcing when the people of Japanese ancestry living in a certain geographic area had to be at the departure site. These people are at a departure site with their belongings, waiting to board the bus that would take them to Santa Anita. Some people went by train to Santa Anita. Our family went by bus. Registration at the assembly center was a stressful event. I remember seeing such a scene when I got off the bus at Santa Anita. Santa Anita Assembly Center was built at the Santa Anita Racetrack in Arcadia, California. It housed 18,000 people. 8,000 lived in the horse stables, and 10,000 lived in barracks built in the parking lot. Santa Anita had 6 shower buildings for the 18,000 people. The shower in the stable area was built for horses, so it was really huge. Santa Anita had 6 mess halls, so we had to wait in a long line 3 times a day. My oldest sister was a waitress, and my father was a cook in a mess hall. Because the individual barracks didn't have refrigerators, there was a milk station that dispensed milk for mothers with babies. My second sister worked in a milk station. Every Saturday, we had to bring our mattresses outside for a sunning and airing. My father had to bring out 6 mattresses and 6 beds. A truck would drive by tossing a roll of toilet paper on each mattress. That was your allotment of toilet paper for the week. The restrooms did not have any toilet paper. You brought your own toilet paper to the restroom. There was a camouflage net factory in Santa Anita. The Geneva Convention states that POWs cannot work on war-related material. The Army said only Niseis were working on the camouflage nets, and the Niseis were U.S. citizens. Therefore, they were not POWs. Many people had hot plates to warm milk for the babies or warm food for the sick. The hot plates overloaded the electrical circuits and blew the fuses. On August 4, the government did barrack-to-barrack search and confiscated the hot plates. The internees got irate and mobs formed. The Army sent in 200 soldiers and 2 half-tracks. With my own eyes, I saw the troops with fixed bayonets approach in a V formation. This quelled the riot. During the night, the Army sent in 200 additional troops. In the fall of 1942, the 10 permanent concentration camps were completed. Our family went from Santa Anita to Jerome, Arkansas. It took 3 days in a shade-drawn railroad train. There was an armed guard at each end of the railroad train. The shades were drawn so you could not look outside the window to see where you were going. Jerome and Roar were located in the southeast corner of Arkansas. The camps were organized into blocks with about 250 to 300 people per block. Each block had a mess hall and restrooms. Jerome and Roar were in bayou country. The mud was everywhere. There was a moat completely around the block to drain off the rainwater. I was in 3rd grade in Jerome. Because we could not buy Valentine cards, our teacher bought Valentine cards on the outside and brought them in. We sold the Valentine cards in our classroom for 1 cent or 2 cents or 3 cents. In 1942, 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry immediately went to camp. But Fred Korematsu did not go to camp with his family. Fred was arrested for disobeying EO 9066. He was brought to trial and lost in the lower courts. Fred challenged his conviction all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. At the Supreme Court, the government Solicitor General argued that military necessity was the reason for EO 9066, and that required expulsion and incarceration of Fred Korematsu. The Supreme Court accepted that argument and voted 6-3 to uphold Fred Korematsu's conviction. The 3 dissenting justices wrote the following. Dissenting Justice Owen Roberts said, "This is not a case of keeping people off the streets at night as was Hirabayashi. It is a case of convicting a citizen for not submitting to imprisonment in a concentration camp solely because of his ancestry." Dissenting Justice Frank Murphy said, "Not one person of Japanese ancestry was accused or convicted of espionage or sabotage after Pearl Harbor while they were still free." Dissenting Justice Robert Jackson said, quote, "A loaded weapon ready for the hand of any authority that can bring forward a plausible claim of an urgent need." In 1945, the government decided to close the camps. Some of the internees were reluctant to leave camp because they lost everything when going into camp. The government mounted a campaign to force everybody out. The internees were given $25 and a train ticket to their final destination. During the war, 4 young Nisei challenged EO 9066, and their cases went all the way to the Supreme Court. In these cases, the government argued that EO 9066 was required of military necessity. As evidence, the government Solicitor General Charles Fahey cited the final report written in 1942 by General John DeWitt. In 1982, Aiko Yoshinaga found 2 versions of General DeWitt's final report. The original final report stated, quote, "Evacuation was based on stereotyping against Japanese Americans." And the revised final report said, "Evacuation was impelled by military necessity." Aiko Yoshinaga also found naval intelligence, FBI, and other documents that flatly contradicted the government's claim that Japanese Americans were a threat. Solicitor General Fahey had these documents when he argued at the Supreme Court. Government lawyers wrote memos to Fahey stating that he must present these evidence, but he did not. When the government lies during the court proceeding, you can have your conviction vacated. This is called the writ of error coram nobis. In 1982, this is how Fred Korematsu got his 1944 conviction vacated. The government appealed its loss to the Ninth Court of Appeals. The appeal court said that, quote, "racial bias was the cornerstone of the internment orders," and ruled in Korematsu's favor. The government did not appeal its loss to the Supreme Court, and therefore the Supreme Court did not have a chance to review its 1944 ruling. Therefore, the 1944 Supreme Court ruling that incarceration based on race is constitutional is still the law of the land. In 1980, Congress established the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians and tasked it to study the facts surrounding EO 9066. The Commission held hearings throughout the country and heard testimony from 750 people. In 1983, the Commission concluded that EO 9066 was not justified by military necessity, but rather the result of racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and failure of political leadership. The Civil Liberty Act of 1988, passed by Congress and signed by President Reagan, apologized for the wartime evacuation and incarceration and gave a reparation of $20,000 to 82,200 Japanese Americans. During World War II, no person of Japanese ancestry was accused, brought to trial, or convicted of spying or sabotaging against the United States of America. On February 4, 2014, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia told the University of Hawaii Law School students while discussing Korematsu versus United States, quote, "You are kidding yourself if you think the same thing will not happen again."